When Bruno looked up again, he saw Pavel coming quickly towards him. And only when he arrived did he feel confident enough to let the woozy feeling that he was surrounding him take him over completely. So over here we see that Bruno feels confident only when Pavel comes. So this is effect on others. Bruno felt that he could trust Pavel to care for him. And then Pavel comes quickly, so we can see that he wants to give aid quickly. He shows concern for Bruno. So this tells me that he is compassionate and kind and wants to help. So Pavel comes quickly towards him, and we also know that his effect on others is that Bruno feels confident only when Pavel arrives, and then he lets the woozy feeling that was surrounding him take him over completely. So that was how much trust he has for Pavel. He fell a little but landed on the ground this time as Pavel scooped him up. So the action of scooping is very sincere. It's not tentative, it's not hesitant. It's a pretty big action. This tells me that Pavel is confident. He is not hesitant in giving aid or care. So Bruno says, I don't know what happened, he said. It didn't seem dangerous at all. And here Bruno is downplaying the situation. He is trying to defend himself and get out of responsibility. Or trouble, right? So he's saying, I don't know what happened. It didn't seem dangerous at all. So he is trying to get out of 100% of trouble. Okay, he's trying to say that he didn't know how anything happened at all. So hopefully the adult would not scold him. So Pavel understands this and Pavel responds. This is his response. Pavel responds in a quiet voice that immediately made Bruno feel safe. So this is once again effect on others. And this shows me that Pavel is a person who makes Bruno feel safe. He doesn't judge Bruno. He doesn't scold Bruno. In fact, his own first response is to have a quiet voice where he responds to Bruno trying to defend himself. So that's quite sensitive of Pavel. So sensitive, kind, non-judgmental. Yeah. And this makes Bruno feel safe immediately. And then Bruno says, I did. So you can see that Bruno is willing to accept the fact that he really did get into trouble, and all that was said in response to him is that you certainly did. Then Pavel carried him across the lawn, so he has to walk across the lawn, then back towards the house, taking him into the kitchen. So this seems like a long way, and yet Pavel just carries him all the way. So that's pretty nice. Taking him into the kitchen and settling him on one of the wooden chairs. Where's mother? Asked Bruno, looking around for the first person he usually searched for when he had an accident. Your mother hasn't returned yet, I'm afraid. So Pavel over here is not saying that he is scared, he's being very apologetic. So this is very nice of Pavel because Pavel is, he is apologetic. He knows that Bruno is scared, his mother is not around, and yet he is very respectful of Bruno's scared feelings, right? Okay, so he said Pavel, who was kneeling on the floor. And kneeling is a very interesting word because when it comes to kneeling, and when an adult kneels to a child's height, or when an adult goes from sort of their high stature down to the child's eye level, this shows that they are willing to be physically lower. So willing to be physically lower himself down to Bruno's level. This is really respectful and this is kind. Yeah. And examining the knee. I'm the only one here. What's going to happen then? Asked Bruno, beginning to panic slightly, an emotion that might encourage tears. So over here, Bruno is very panicky and he's clearly fearful. And then he says over here, I might bleed to death, which is, we know as a literary device, it is a hyperbole. So, which is an exaggeration. And even with this exaggeration, all Pavel does is to give a gentle laugh. So this is really nice of Pavel, because even though Bruno is so dramatic, but Pavel respects the real fear and does not mock. So unlike, say, for example, the Fury or father who is very strict and omits all feelings or emotions, or the Fury who mocks what the children say, Pavel, in contrast, actually respects the fear, doesn't mock, maybe just gives a gentle laugh, it's not mocking, and shook his head. You're not going to bleed to death, he said, pulling a stool across and settling Bruno's leg on it. Don't move for a moment, there's a first aid box over here. So this is assurance number one. He's very assuring over here. Even though it is very dramatic, it's very childish, certainly he's not going to bleed to death over a small cut, but Pavel is still so respectful and so kind. So Bruno watched as he moved around the kitchen, pulling the green first aid box from a cupboard and filling a small bowl with water, testing it first with his finger to make sure that it wasn't too cold. So in this case over here, I can tell that he is very careful. He is very meticulous in his care that he's giving Bruno, and he's really ensuring Bruno's comfort. Okay, so once again, we see a lot of care here. And then Bruno goes back to being his dramatic self and asking whether he will need to go to the hospital. No, said Pavel when he returned to his kneeling position. So once again, we're reminded of that kneeling position. Dipping a dry cloth into the bowl and touching it gently. We can see lots of repetition of the word gentle. So we know that when something is repeated, it's really calling our attention to it. So repetition of the word gently there. He's gentle and kind to Bruno's knee. And even though it's so gentle, it makes Bruno wince in pain, even though it's not really all that painful. And so Pavel assures him again, right? It's only a small cut, it wouldn't even need stitches. Bruno frowned and bit his lip nervously. So Bruno is still really nervous, still really fearful, still really sort of like making a mountain out of a molehill, but Pavel is still kind and respectful. Pavel cleaned the wound of blood and then held another cloth to it quite tightly for a few minutes. When he pulled it away gently, so we see gently again, gently and gently, the bleeding had stopped, and he took a small bottle of green liquid from the first aid box and dabbed it over the wound, which stung quite sharply and made Bruno say ow a few times in rapid succession. It's not that bad, said Pavel in a gentle and kindly voice. So this is assuring one more time. Don't make it worse by thinking it's more painful than it actually is. And over here, we see that he is consistently kind and reassuring even though Bruno is dramatic about his small wound, right? And this don't make it worse by thinking it's more painful than it actually is. Really is sensible advice. And also I think it makes us feel a little bit for Pavel because we know that he's in such a suffering situation. And if anybody is going to be the one who's going to be complaining about how bad their life is, it's going to be him. But of course, through Bruno's sort of naive, childlike nature, he's not going to be able to understand that, right? So this is just sensible advice by Pavel. Then this made sense to Bruno. So this is effect on others. He has got received sensible advice. He knows that it's wise. So Bruno trusts Pavel's wisdom. And he resisted the urge. So this actually makes Bruno, who is usually quite outspoken about his discomfort or what he's feeling, he actually resisted the urge to say ow anymore. And when Pavel had finished applying the green liquid, he took a bandage from the first aid box and taped it to the cut. There he said, "All better?" Bruno nodded and felt a little ashamed of himself for not behaving as bravely as he would have liked. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," said Pavel. "Now you need to stay sitting here for a few minutes before you walk around on it again, alright? Let the wound relax and don't go near that swing again today." So notice what you are seeing over here with Pavel. Now you need to stay sitting here for a few minutes before you walk around it again. Let the wound relax and don't go near. So you're getting very consistent kind of conversations from Pavel. There is no judgment at all of Bruno. No telling him that why he's so stupid, why he go and sit on this go and go sit on the swing, doesn't he know better, etc, etc, etc. There is no harshness. There is no blame. Just really wise, sensible advice. So once again, it's just all very kind and very respectful all the way. And Bruno nodded and kept his legs stretched out on the stool while Pavel went over to the sink and washed his hands carefully, even scrubbing under his nails with a wire brush before drying them off and returning to the potatoes. And this is very interesting about Pavel. It reminds us about like a surgeon, maybe. You know how they do like a scrub in and scrub out before and after surgery. So they're very meticulous with their hygiene and their care. And then we're just thinking, is there some sort of like possible medical background? Is he just a person who cares very much about his hygiene? This gives us a little bit of a hint as to what's to come. "Will you tell mother what happened?" asked Bruno, who had spent the last few minutes wondering whether he would be viewed as a hero for suffering an accident or a villain for building a death trap. So over here, Bruno is still very naive and very childlike. He is worried about what he would be perceived as. So Bruno keeps thinking about himself. Okay, worries about how he will be perceived. Okay. "I think she'll see for herself," said Pavel, who took the carrots over to the table now and sat down opposite Bruno as he began to peel them onto an old newspaper. So over here, Pavel is not into drama. He's not going to sabotage or color or give his own perspective to mother. He knows that mother will make her own judgment instead of opposing it. Or also he knows his place. He knows that there is no point saying anything because he is viewed only as a lowly servant. So we're not sure about that, right? So there are possible interpretations about that. But whatever it is, he is wise in knowing that mother will be able to see it for herself. So yes, I suppose so, said Bruno. Perhaps she'll want me to take me to a doctor. So he's still in that very dramatic mode. I don't think so, said Pavel quietly. So even though this has been the upteen time that Bruno is so dramatic and over the top with his small little cut, Pavel is still consistently kind and quiet. He never once tells Bruno to knock it off, you're being too over dramatic. Very unlike Gretel, who mocks him or laughs at him. You never know, said Bruno, who didn't want his accident to be dismissed quite so easily. It was, after all, quite the most exciting thing that had happened to him since arriving here. It could be worse than it seems. And so over here, we understand about Bruno's sort of childish perspective again, right? And that his small little cut is the most exciting thing that has ever happened. And in contrast, we look at Pavel's reaction, which is to barely seem to be listening to what Bruno says, and we wonder why he's not really listening, or he's not really giving a reaction. And if we empathize with Pavel, is there a sense where Pavel is perhaps thinking that, oh dear, for this young boy over here, the biggest thing that has happened to him is that small cut. And then we contrast that to that immense suffering that all the Jews or Pavel himself is probably going through. So maybe that's why there is sort of like an emotional disconnect over here, because there is such a big contrast with what Bruno is feeling and what Pavel is going through as well, right? So clearly this is difficult for Pavel, but then there's something that Bruno says that Pavel decides he must respond to. So, well, how do you know, asked Bruno quickly, growing irritable now despite the fact that this was the same man who had come out to pick him off the ground and brought him in and taken care of him. You're not a doctor. So this is the one thing that makes Pavel stop peeling the carrots for a moment and looked across the table at Bruno, his head held low, his eyes looking up as if he was wondering what to say to such a thing. He sighed, so he can't resist telling Bruno what happened, and seemed to consider it for quite a long time. He really doesn't think that there's any point saying to Bruno, but also he cannot resist telling Bruno about his own identity and his own life, right? So we are thinking about the issues of identity, of who he was before he came over here, and he cannot resist telling Bruno about his identity. So he says, yes, I am. And Bruno stared at him in surprise. This didn't make any sense to him. But you are a waiter, he said slowly, and you peel the vegetables for dinner. This is all that he's been reduced to. How can you be a doctor too? Young man, said Pavel, and Bruno appreciated. So this word over here, appreciated, is effect on others. Clearly you can see here that compared to a person like Lieutenant Kotler, he is very respectful once again of Bruno, and he makes Bruno feel very respected as well. Appreciated the fact that he had the courtesy to call him young man instead of little man as Lieutenant Kotler had. I certainly am a doctor. Yes, I am, and I certainly am. This is repetition of his certainty of his identity. Right? So next we see that just because a man glances up at the sky at night does not make him an astronomer, Bruno had no idea what Pavel meant, but something about what he had said made him look at him closely for the first time. So Bruno, as you know, is very naive, but now he doesn't take it for granted. He's looking at Pavel for the first time, and this is all the physical description of Pavel. He was quite a small man, very skinny, with long fingers and angular features. He was older than father, but younger than grandfather, which still meant he was quite old. And although Bruno had never laid eyes on him before coming to Auschwitz, something about his face made him believe that he had worn a beard in the past. So this is quite sad, because we know that for Jews who believe in Judaism, which is what the Jews believe in, beard wearing or keeping their beards long is a tradition. right? So the men of Jewish tradition are proud to keep their beards. They are proud to grow it out, and it's really part of their identity as well. So this is their identity, right? Their religious identity. And then there is just one sentence over here, and it says here, but not anymore. And it feels as if it's about erasing identity. And we are sort of getting a glimpse into the fact that, like, the Jews who are brought from their homeland, so much of their identity is being erased. So much of what makes them who they are is sort of just taken away from them. And I think that's worse than just dying, right? But I don't understand, said Bruno, wanting to get to the bottom of this. If you're a doctor, then why are you waiting on tables? Why are you working at a hospital? Why aren't you working at a hospital somewhere? So lots of questions by Bruno. Pavel hesitated for a long time before answering, and while he did so, Bruno said nothing. He wasn't sure why he felt that the polite thing to do was to wait until Pavel was ready to speak. So even here, even as a young child, Bruno can tell that this is a very important and time to not interrupt anybody. Before I came here, I practiced as a doctor, he said finally. Practice, asked Bruno, who was unfamiliar with the word. Weren't you any good then? So you can see here that Bruno is still very naive, right? He doesn't know like the meaning either. And Pavel smiled. I was very good, he said, but I always wanted to be a doctor, you see. I always wanted to be a doctor from the time I was your age. This is a long time because we know that he's a very old man now, which means that he has harbored this ambition for a really long time. And if he had harbored this ambition for a really long time, then we can sort of be reminded that this is a very brutal situation. The massacre of the Jews is not just about killing people, right? It's about destroying dreams that people have had since young, right? It's about taking away their dreams, their identity, and these are things that Pavel has harbored. These are dreams that Pavel has harbored since he was a small boy. So Bruno says quickly, I want to be an explorer. So even though Pavel is having this really difficult conversation, right? Bruno just makes it all about himself. So Bruno still cannot grasp the severity of the situation, right? He turns the conversation to be about him instead. So even though you might say that Bruno is very selfish or anything like that, but really all just boils down to Bruno being very naive. Like, he cannot understand that the situation is so severe. He can't understand about this whole idea about identity being erased, about people being massacred, about people dying, about this one man's plan to eradicate them all. All he just thinks that, oh, you telling me that you want to be a doctor? I see, I want to be an explorer, said Bruno quickly. And then Pavel, even though we know that this is a really difficult conversation for him, that he has hesitated for so long before he can even speak of the suffering or his identity of the past. It's difficult conversation for him. Yet he is warm and kind and respectful of Bruno right till the end. And so looking at this entire excerpt, we can really see that Pavel is so wise, he's so long-suffering, he's so respectful, he's so kind, he's so compassionate, and we just feel that it is such a waste to treat Pavel in such a horrible way that is so demeaning and so degrading as all. Yeah.